Hey guys, I'm Jack with Jack Wagon Overlanding, and in this video we're going to talk about wheel spacers. The two biggest questions we get asked about wheel spacers are, what is a wheel spacer and do I need it for my build? First off, a wheel spacer is a cylinder made of varying metals, typically aluminum but sometimes steel, that's going to have either one set or two sets of holes through it to allow you to widen the stance of your vehicle. Using these wheel spacers, you can widen the track of your truck for aesthetic and performance benefits. While we do like our trucks to look good, we typically don't do this so often for the aesthetic's sake, but more so to get better on and off-road performance. When making your stance wider, this gives your truck more stability and balance during cornering and turning whenever you've raised the center of gravity of your truck. And they can also allow you to run a wider tire with less risk of rubbing the insides of your wheel well liners. It's important to note, whenever you're adding different tire sizes to your truck, there's two types of rubbing you can have. One is the top and front and rear of your wheel well. You can avoid that rubbing by lifting your truck. However, regardless of how high you lift your truck, you still have to make sure you accommodate for the in and out play whenever you're turning your wheel. This is why when we add a wheel spacer and we push further away from the wheel well of the truck, now we can prevent rubbing in and out. Two types of rubbing. Make sure you accommodate for both whenever going with larger than stock tires. Now, a disc spacer is going to have one set of bolt holes on its cylinder. This is going to allow you to mount the disc onto the hub of the truck and put the wheel onto the disc, and using one set of longer bolts, putting the bolt through the wheel, through the disc, and into the hub in all positions. We work with the Mercedes G Wagon most commonly, so in our case it's a 5-bolt pattern. In each disc spacer you would see 5 bolts going through the wheel, through the disc, and into the hub. Now, style 2 would be using an adapter spacer. Here you can see that there's one set of bolt holes with no threading and another set of bolt holes that does have threading. The way these work is you set the spacer onto the hub of the truck, and then using the 5 non-threaded holes, use the provided bolts with these adapters to go through the adapter and into the hub. Next, you can put your wheel against the adapter and use your current bolts that you already use for your wheels to go from the wheel and into the threaded holes of the adapter. Using an adapter spacer is a much safer solution, as it allows the use of 10 different small bolts that are now distributing the load across each other to minimize the load on one single bolt. On the other hand, using a disc spacer only uses 5 long bolts, which are more likely to shear and fail over time, especially during extreme use. Now, what do you need for your truck? At Jack Wagon Overlanding, when we start talking about wheel spacers, it's typically because we're lifting a vehicle. If your truck's at the factory ride height, we don't often recommend using a wheel spacer because we don't really see the need for it. However, at stock height, it's not uncommon for a client to want to widen their stance to match up with their fender flares. Because there's so many different wheels out there with varying offsets and back spaces, it's impossible to say exactly what offset you're going to need with every single wheel in this one video. If you have a wheel besides a factory wheel, we encourage you to reach out to us and we can tell you which spacers will work best for your specific use. Here's how you can check on your own. We just so happen to have a truck in the shop right now that is going to be receiving a wheel spacer upgrade, amongst some other things. Using this truck, a straight edge, and a tape measure, I can show you how to quickly determine what size wheel spacer you need for your truck. First, align a straight edge with the outside edge of your fender flare. Next, determine where on your tire and wheel assembly you want to be flush with the fender flare. Once you have that determined, measure from that point to the inside edge of the straight edge, and that's going to give you the size wheel spacer you need. In our case, we want the outermost point of the tire to be flush with the fender flare, so we'll take our measurement here. Taking that measurement, I get 1 3/8, which is 1.375 inches, but we're going to call it 1.4 inches for easier math. A 30 millimeter wheel spacer would give us 1.2 inches of added width, So in this situation, we're within 0.2 inches of being exactly flush with the edge of these fender flares. In our situation, that slight tuck is better than a slight poke because it's going to minimize the amount of debris that goes onto the side of the truck whenever it's being used. As this truck's going to be receiving a 2-inch lift, going out 30 millimeters is just enough for what we're trying to do, and we don't see any reason to go out any further than that. At this time, we only offer two options of wheel spacers, a 30 millimeter wheel spacer and a 50 millimeter wheel spacer. 30 millimeters is approximately 1.2 inches, and 50 millimeters is approximately 2 inches. Any smaller than that would require going down to a disc spacer, and you would no longer be able to utilize the 2 bolt set construction and have to go instead to one longer set of bolts to make the disc spacers fit. Now, let's say you're lifting your G-Wagon and you want to figure out which stance is going to be best for your build. At 2 inches of lift, we typically like to see our offsets somewhere in the range of positive 35 down to positive 20 millimeters of offset. What exactly is offset? Here you can see we have a very bad drawing of a tire mounted onto a truck. We're looking at it from behind the truck, so we'll call this the passenger side. The dotted line represents the center line of your tire, slicing it in half. If you were to mount the wheel onto the hub of your truck with the face touching right at the center line, this would be considered a 0 offset. However, if you were to mount the wheel so that it mounts to the hub towards the inside of the tire, this would be a negative offset, giving us a wider stance. As you can see, the truck goes more in and the wheel is going more out because now this is where we're mounting as opposed to mounting here before. The further in of the wheel we go, the lower the offset gets. Consider this as negative as you can go, and consider the outer face as positive as you can go. In the G-Wagon's case, we don't typically see a negative offset. We hardly even see a neutral offset. More often than not, we see a very high or positive offset. For reference, on a standard G-Wagon factory wheel, you'll be anywhere from positive 63 to positive 43 millimeters of offset. This means that the mounting face of the wheel is further to the outside than the inside, like pictured here. And when we do that, the wheel is going to tuck far into the truck. Why is that bad? Consider that this gap is only 1 inch wide. If we decide to upgrade our tires without changing the wheels and now have a wider tire, we're more likely to rub because the clearance is very tight. I can put tons of lift on my truck, but if I widen my tires without changing my offset, I'm going to end up rubbing in this location. That's the inside of the wheel well. The top and where the rear and front may be is not our problem. It's the inside that matters. So, how do we fix rubbing here? Well, let's assume that here we're at positive 63 millimeters of offset, and we put a tire that is 1 inch wider than we typically use. By adding a 30 millimeter wheel spacer, we now go from a positive 60 millimeter offset, and we increase this clearance by 30 millimeters or about 1.2 inches. As we said, we added 1 inch wider tire. We'll notice that half of the tire is going to go towards the inside of the truck, and the other half inch of that added width is going to go towards the outside of the truck. The ½ inch inside is what we care about. By going with 1 inch wider tire, we've lost ½ inch of clearance. Now, by going with a 30 millimeter spacer, we're getting 1.2 inches back. Effectively, by going with the wider tire solution, but using that wheel spacer, we actually gained 0.7 inches of clearance compared to our factory setup. As you can see, adding a wheel spacer, regardless of the height of your truck, is going to allow you to run a slightly wider tire and can also give benefits of pushing out the outer face to match up with the fender flares you currently have. Whenever we're lifting trucks, another thing that becomes important is the width of our truck. This is important because anytime you raise the height of your truck, you're effectively raising the center of gravity of your truck. One way we like to describe wheel spacers is like doing a squat. No one ever says do a squat with your knees touching. They always say shoulder width apart. When you're doing a squat, having that wider stance allows you to have balance side to side whenever you're moving around. With the truck, it's the same way. Whenever we go to turn, you're going to feel the force acting against the truck, wanting to roll over to the opposite side you're turning. Think of somebody running down a field and making a sharp cut to the left. If I'm running really fast and I want to go left, I don't simply turn my hips and go that way. I actually will put my right foot down, pivot, and then move that way. When you lift your truck without widening the stance, you're effectively feeling like you have no pinky toe and creating a situation where your truck wants to roll over to the side. By widening that stance, it now has a plant foot that's going to give better grip and better control whenever you're making those sharp turns. Whenever we lift a truck up to 2 inches, we like to look for a stance that's somewhere in the ballpark of positive 20 to positive 35 millimeters of offset. That means if you're using a positive 43 to a positive 63 millimeter offset wheel, more than likely we're going to want to use some sort of wheel spacer. More often than not, the 30 millimeter wheel spacer ends up being right where we want it with a 2-inch lift. Positive 43 would now come down to a positive 13 millimeter, and positive 63 would now come down to a positive 33 millimeter. Having a little bit more stance, in our opinion, is better than not having enough stance. We're not big fans of trucks where the inside of the tires poke all the way out beyond the fender flares. That's not really our look. However, a little bit of poke is going to give you added stability and aesthetically can make the truck look slightly more aggressive. There is one downside to going too wide with your truck that becomes glaringly obvious anytime you go driving on a dirty road. You will find that the wider you go with your stance, the more likely debris is to be slung up onto the side of your truck. If that is a concern for you, let's be sure to talk over which option is best for your build to make sure that we're not ruining the side of your truck. Us personally, we're not too concerned with that because we like to take the truck off-road and it gets beat up on already. We like to keep it clean, but we also do use it, so we understand that there is going to be some shortcomings by adding wheel spacers. Whenever we go up to a 4-inch lift, we like to look for something between negative 10 and positive 25 millimeters of offset. That means if you have a positive 43 to a positive 63 millimeter factory wheel, we're more than likely going to be using a 50 millimeter wheel spacer. Positive 43 minus 50 is going to get us to negative 7 millimeters of offset. Positive 63 millimeters minus 50 millimeters is going to get us to 13 millimeters of offset. Going with this wider stance is one of the things we like to do to counteract the added center of gravity anytime we're lifting these vehicles. Failure to widen your track and make other adjustments that we recommend in other videos will result in a sloppy ride. We do build our trucks to look good, but more importantly, we want them to be functional, and we take a lot of time to consider each individual's build to make sure that not only it looks great in pictures, but it functions well whenever you're using it in real life. If you want to learn more about how wheel spacers work or what wheel spacer setup might be best for your build, by all means, check out our website and feel free to reach out to us directly where we can go over your unique needs. We realize that not every build's the same, and we want to make sure that your truck is getting the attention that it needs. I'm Jack with Jack Wagon Overlanding, and I thank you for watching.